This morning, verses 1 down through 4. Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself, that the Lord may continue his word which he spake concerning me, saying, If thy children take heed to their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. Chapter 2 picks back up here where chapter 1 began. David is a very old man, well stricken in years, and he knows death is at the door. And so he told Solomon he's about to go the way of all the earth, and that's just another way of saying ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And David knew that time was at hand. And so doing, he wanted to share some advice with his young son. Remember, Solomon now, they say he's probably only like 17 years old. And I know culture then is far different. I mean, we still look at 17, 18-year-olds as kids. Yeah. Back then, you were expected to be adult and act like an adult. But still, 17 years old to be becoming king of a nation, he had quite of a challenge ahead of him. And the advice David shares, great advice. And it's advice we all need. And this is coming from a man who stumbled more than once, but he was quick to repent. He had a heart for the Lord, and that's what, God credited him, or acknowledged him as having a heart after God's own heart. Now, you don't have to turn there this morning, but if you want to mark it, 1 Chronicles chapters 28 and 29 expands on this charge that David gave to Solomon, and it also included his instructions and stuff for Solomon to build the temple. So what was the advice here that David shared? Well, there in verse 3 and 4, he simply told Solomon to continue to walk in the Lord, to keep his commandments, keep his statutes, observe his judgments. And basically what we would say is David told Solomon to keep and obey the whole law of God. Not do like we want to do today and pick and choose. Well, I like this, okay, but I don't like this, so I'm not going to do it. Obey the whole law of God. And David had two reasons that he shared with Solomon here for him to continue to observe keeping the faith and observing, obeying the laws of God. He said the first thing was that you can prosper. Now, I don't know if this is a verse that these modern, get rich quick people have clung to. It's often pictured in the Old Testament that obedience and righteousness result in material or financial gain. If we look at Abraham and Jacob, Joseph, David, walking after the Lord and doing your best to, obey Him and keep the law, for them it resulted in material and financial gain. But I don't think that's the whole of what David's saying here to Solomon about prospering. Because that's not necessarily just the financial gain is not necessarily the point I think David's trying to get across. Here's an idea that goes beyond the financial gain. What about a life that's free from the consequences of sin? Is that not a wonderful blessing? One that you can't, I don't care how much money you have, if you can't buy that. Now, we've got to understand that we're going to fail from time to time. We're going to sin. And we can go to the Lord as long as our heart is one of repentance, and we can go to Him and seek forgiveness. And He's promised that He will forgive us. But never make the mistake of thinking that removes the consequences of what we've done. We talked about it last week. David's affair with Bathsheba resulted in an infant child dying. And God said, the sword will never leave your house. And oftentimes sin sets into motion events and consequences that not only we may have to deal with, but it may be something our children continuing after us may have to deal with. And so, a life of seeking godly wisdom, of learning to wait on the Lord instead of just jumping out on our own and doing the, whatever happens to pop into our mind is this is my plan, this is what I want to do, learning to wait on Him, walking and living in His blessings. Again, there's no money you can put on that. You can't buy it. Actually, that's the only way, just living by faith and walking in righteousness is the only way that can be had. The second thing David brought up here is that God promised him that if your sons obey, if they continue to serve and honor me, you'll always have a descendant on the throne. And as we read through 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we find that a lot of them may started off good, but they stumbled along the way. Solomon, for all the wisdom, for everything he's credited with, he stumbled. Rehoboam, his son after him, things got worse, and as things went on, there was a few good kings scattered throughout here and there, but they got to where they started off bad, they ended bad, and they drug the nation down in their sin and their depravity until finally Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar showed up. God kept his promise to David, even though many of them failed and stumbled. Jesus became the ultimate fulfillment of the promise that God made to David about his family, his descendants, always reigning on the throne in Israel. Now, we have some similar advice to what David gave to Solomon there in the New Testament. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33, Jesus said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And again, he's not talking about just money and wealth. You can be the poorest man on the planet and yet be one of the most blessed people that there is. Now, David challenged Solomon here, and it's good advice for us. Put God first in your life, and you can trust and be sure that God will take care of you. Now, at no point in my life have I ever thought I needed a bunch of commas in my bank account. But I've always had a roof over my head. I've always had food to eat, clothes to wear. So, we've got to get off this hang-up that's become so prevalent in modern teaching and preaching that, well, if you just say this prayer, or if you do this or do that, God's going to make you rich. That's not the case, and that's not what David was trying to get across to Solomon, or what Jesus was teaching to the disciples. Now, because of Solomon's age, it may have been behind David talking about prove yourself a man, be of good courage. And that ties in with the advice that David just shared with them. You're not going to be able to do those things without the Lord. You've got to trust him and depend on him. Do what he says, the way he says, and he'll bless you and take care of you. But don't try to do this on your own. I would say don't do this in your own wisdom, which that's what Solomon's known for. But he didn't get the wisdom on his own. That's what he asked God for. And so this is really what David was sharing with Solomon here, something all of us need to learn from and take to heart. Look now, verses 5 down through 9. David's got some more instructions here. Moreover, thou knowest also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the host of Israel, unto Abner the son of Ner, and unto Amasa the son of Jether, whom he slew, and shed the blood of war in peace, and put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. Do therefore according to thy wisdom, and let not his hoar hair or his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. But show kindness unto the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be of those that eat at thy table, for so they came to me when I fled because of Absalom thy brother. And behold, thou hast with thee Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite of Bahurim, which cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at Jordan, and I swear to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put thee to death with the sword. Now therefore hold him not guiltless, for thou art a wise man, and knowest what thou oughtest to do unto him, but his whorehead bring thou down to the grave with blood. When David's finished here giving Solomon the charge, the instructions to continue to follow the Lord, he continues here with instructions on establishing his throne. He's king, but if he doesn't do some certain things, he may not be king for long. And David's challenging him to deal with possible enemies in the future. Now, this was common for a new king, to remove the possible threats. Read through the rest of this, 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Coups, where you slew, uprisers slew kings and their families. Newly appointed kings who look back on anybody that might have opposed them or caused them problems in the past. Guess what? They're not going to be around to cause any problems in the future. That's just how they dealt with that. And so the first order of business here that David gives to Solomon is you got to deal with Joab. Now, we talked about Joab a little bit last week. This was David's military commander. I mean, you'd say he was a general over all the host, the army of Israel. And he was one of David's most loyal servants. But his loyalty sometimes was loyalty to a fault. As loyal as he was to David, he wasn't always obedient to what David told him to do or asked him to do. And at times, if Joab thought that it was in David's best interest, he would just take things upon himself to go and do it. And so David reminds Solomon here of a couple of incidents that Joab killed Abner and Amasa. Both of them were military leaders. But Joab hunted them down and killed them. And I think he did it because they were rising leaders. They were coming up in the ranks. And Joab probably looked at them as being threats to his position. And so that was something he wasn't going to tolerate. Now it's odd here, David mentions those two, but he didn't mention Joab killing Absalom. And that's David specifically said, don't kill him. You know, when you read the account in the Bible, you can lean one of two ways. It was either an accident. Joab just flew around the corner on his horse and his spear happened to be at a certain position and he ran Absalom through. Or again, he was doing what he thought was best for David, even though David instructed him not to. He killed his son Absalom. Let's not forget our lesson from last week, chapter 1, as David's son Adonijah rises up in rebellion, seeking to take the throne, Joab, along with the priest Abiathar, joined with Adonijah to help him accomplish this takeover. And even though David's not dead yet, nor has he announced a successor to the throne, Adonijah and Joab now, they led this uprising with the intent of making themselves king. Now, I don't know why David didn't take care of this himself. It could be, he was conflicted with Joab's loyalty. There's no denying he had been a very loyal servant, even though, he took matters into his own hands at times, even being disobedient to David. But David never took care of this. Some people think that Joab knew what David did to Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, and he was using it as like blackmail. Now, Joab wasn't the only one that knew about it. Nathan knew about it, but there would be no cause or reason to think that Nathan would ever hold that over David's head or try to use it for personal gain. But in any way, on his deathbed here, he's instructing Solomon basically to deal with Joab, to kill him. Don't let his gray hairs go down. Don't let him get it done now. But then David charges Solomon. He wants him to show kindness to the family of Barzillai. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. That Barzillai and his family helped David. If you look back in 2 Samuel chapter 17, you find David basically running for his life, hiding from Absalom, and Barzillai and his family helped David, gave him shelter and protection, helped him hide out. And so when David tells Solomon to let them eat at the king's table, that goes way beyond a dinner date. That probably meant give them a house, rent-free, bought and paid for, a monthly allotment of food, and coming from the king's table, it wasn't scraps, it was the best food, and land for them to farm that they can help and support themselves. And so David wanted this kindness for the act that Barzillai and his family had showed to him to continue. He was going to continue to bless and help those who helped them. And now, from wanting Joab killed to showing kindness to Barzillai and his family, David turns back to another character. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, you read about, again, pronunciation, Shimei. This is the guy that when David was running from Absalom, Shimei was from the family of Saul. And he recognized David. He came out. he cursed David with some vile cursings. The Bible says he even threw rocks at him, mocked him, scorned him. And David, I don't know, he forgave him, but anyway, David promised Shimei that he wouldn't kill him. But now here he is charging Solomon, you got to take care of this guy. Well, David kept his promise, but justice was finally served upon Shimei. Solomon was another one he was supposed to kill, take care of. Oh, look now, verses 10 down through 12. So David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years reigned he in Hebron, and 33 years reigned he in Jerusalem. Then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. So David passed away, died, and the phrase he rested with his fathers was just a common phrase of the time that was used. And again, read through 2 Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. It was a common phrase used to tell when a king passed from this life on to the next life. Now, it's easy to say, to picture, David may very easily be one of the greatest men that ever lived. He was a true servant of God. And the Bible here tells us that he was buried in the city of David. Now, there's a Hebrew name that was used, a Hebrew name that was used for the region before it was known as Jerusalem, but that is Jerusalem is the city of David. In Acts chapter 2, verse 29, the Bible tells us that the tomb, where the tomb was, it was known to the apostles of Jesus' day. They knew where David was buried and where the tomb and stuff was. Now, I guess if you go to Jerusalem or Israel today, they're going to show you a site that they may claim is a tomb of David, but most Bible scholars and archaeologists and stuff say, no, that's not the actual location. How do they know or not know? I don't know. But, David was a shepherd. He was a soldier, a king, at times a fugitive, a sinner, a saint, and a poet. Few people can even come close to saying they lived a life as rich and full as what King David lived. 2 Kings chapter 11, and it reiterated by Josephus, ancient historian, It tells us that his weapons and other artifacts, and it was common back in that day, and they say you can't take it with you, but they sure tried, I think, at times. If you look at the tombs of the pharaohs and other people, and they're telling us, David was buried, with his weapons, and I'm sure other artifacts would have been valuable, maybe personal treasures for him. They were buried with him. Now, this passage tells us that Solomon's throne was greatly established. And for the rest of chapter 2, that phrase established is what we're going to focus upon, because unless things chronologically are kind of out of order here, if Solomon has done what David has charged him to do, then his throne is established. If he hasn't done those things yet, if those dangers are still out there, if those problems still exist, then the meaning of the word established hasn't been accomplished yet. But that's going to be the rest of chapter 2. We won't have time to get into it or look at it this morning, but that's what Solomon's setting out to do, what his father told him to do. When you use the term or talk about establishing your throne, that's simply saying you've gotten rid of the opposition. People who might cause problems, or family members that are going to rise up and try to overthrow you. You've taken care of all that. And so once that's done, now your throne is established. And as far as we're going to get this morning is looking at the next thing. David charged Solomon with Joab and Shimei, take care of them. But here comes the next thing that's going to be a challenge to his throne. Let's look in verses 13 down through 18. And Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably. He said, Moreover, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And she said, Say on. And he said, Thou knowest that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel set their faces on me, that I should reign. Howbeit the kingdom is turned about, and is become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I ask one petition of thee, deny me not. And she said unto him, Say on. And he said, Speak, I pray thee, unto Solomon the king, for he will not say thee nay, that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. And Bathsheba said, Well, I will speak for thee unto the king. So here Adonijah approaches Bathsheba, and you can understand as she asks, Are you coming peaceably? Because if his plans had worked out the way he wanted to, her and Solomon would probably be dead right now. So she's asking, Are you coming in peace? And he said, Yeah, peaceably. It's a valid question. She wanted to know before she took the risk. But look at the arrogance of Adonijah. You know, he says, the kingdom was mine. I was a king. All Israel wanted me to be king. And here's a lesson out of this we need to pay attention to. where did we leave Adonijah at the end of chapter 1? Hanging on to the horns of the altar. And that was a common practice when you sought mercy. You'd go hang on to the horns of the altar. Now, God in His instructions to Moses, when they had the altar built on the corners, they built 4 horns. I picture something like a cow horn. Horns pointing in all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, and pointing up to God. I may be reading more into that than what's there, but that's just what I picture kind of, and why. But, again, if you were in trouble with the law, if you crossed the king or somebody and you wanted mercy, you went and you held on for dear life to the horns on that altar. And so Adonijah did that. And Solomon, when he heard about it, I don't know if forgiveness is the right word or not, but he pardoned Adonijah. Said, if he shows himself worthy, he can live. But if any wickedness, any evil be found in him, he's going to have to die. When we receive mercy or forgiveness of sin, stay humble about it. Don't 2 days later forget about it and go back to the same old arrogant, sinful practice that got us in trouble in the first place. Just recognize God's forgiveness and accept it and move on. But stay humble about it. And if you let pride and arrogance start working its way back in, sin, whatever it was, is going to work its way back in sooner or later anyway. Now, Adonijah's request to Bathsheba was he wanted Abishag for his wife. And it wasn't because she was young. It wasn't because she was beautiful. Most likely, before the physicians, they came up with the idea of having Abishag, the young virgin, cuddle with David in bed to help him provide warmth and heat for himself. And again, I want to remind you, the Bible tells us that there was no sexual contact or relation between them, no hanky-panky kind of stuff going on. But more than likely, David made her, for appearance sake, one of his concubines. Now, the New Testament passage that says to abstain from even the appearance of evil, that goes back to the Old Testament. That's what David was doing. He didn't want people looking at what was taking place there say, oh yeah, we know what's going on with that. False accusations, false rumors, those kind of things getting started. So it's pretty well agreed or sure upon that, before she got in bed with him, whatever the process was, it may have been all he had to do was say so, I don't know. But David would have made her one of his concubines. Now, here's what Adonijah was up to. In ancient times, the succeeding king took the previous king's harem. And if Adonijah had been able to take Abishag, especially if David, had already made her one of his concubines, it would have given him a foot up in continuing his quest for the throne. He'd be able to say, look here, not only am I the oldest living son of David, but now I have his concubine. I have his harem. And it would have been problems for Solomon. Adonijah surely had evil plans. He hadn't remembered Solomon's pardon. He hadn't appreciated Solomon showing him that mercy. And, I don't know what kind of time has passed here. It reads or pictures as not a lot of time, not maybe days or weeks. But Adonijah comes in with this evil plan to Bathsheba. He's getting ready to try to rise up again. So we're going to stop there this morning. But next week, Lord willing, we'll pick back up here and we'll see, Solomon's